Man, I'm just so enjoying worship today. Not that I don't enjoy it every Sunday, but there's something special about today. God is doing amazing, amazing things at Christ Church. So we have around 21 people in the new members class, which is so exciting. And now, what is more exciting for me is that we don't have people in the class that are saying, well, what's the next thing to do that you have to do, right? Like, let's just jump through the hoops so I can feel like I'm in. But one of the things that I love about, I walked in the new members class, I kind of skipped over part of the band rehearsal and walked in to hear what you all were sharing. By the way, can you raise your hand if you're in the new members class? There you go. Awesome. So when I walked in, that was a little awkward, sorry. When I walked in, I was really excited because I could tell these people, they already know that they're walking with Christ and that God is at work in their lives. And we are already part of the family. We're just kind of formalizing the next step, right? And just saying, hey, now let's commit to each other and understand where we're coming from. And what a beautiful thing is to walk with Jesus. And if you don't have a walk with Jesus today, this is a safe place for you to be. If you feel like you're far away from God, or maybe you've done the Christian thing, maybe what your parents have asked you to do, and now it's your turn, and you're like, well, I don't really know that I want to follow in this next step. Let me tell you, it's the best decision that you can ever make, to follow after Jesus. But the interesting thing about the walk with Jesus is that Jesus doesn't just say, well, go and do it. You go and do it, and you figure it out, or just do it because I say so. But Jesus first does. He sets an example, and then he turns around to us and he says, do you want to follow me? And when he asks that question, he's saying, would you do what I just did? Can you say with me, would you do what I just did? That is what God is asking us every day. Why is it so important to be in God's Word? Because in what other way can we learn what God is asking us to do? So this passage that we're going to be reading is going to follow Dr. Vaughn's teaching, which is like, I humble before you because I just learned so much when you were speaking. I was like taking notes left and right, and I'll try to pick up where you left. But I'm going to reverse to the heading of this section of the teaching, which is in chapter 5 of Ephesians, verse 21. I'll just read it for you. You don't need to go there. I promise it's in the Bible, even though it sounds like, do I really have to? This is what it says. Submit. And everyone cringed and said, amen. Submit. It's like, I'd rather you grab a fork and go on a window really hard, because that word is not very in today. But listen, it just doesn't say just submit, and let's just go at the women and at the children and at the slaves. You just submit. But it says this, submit to one another. What a game changer. And what a beautiful thing and what a challenging thing. What does this mean? It means that everyone on earth is going to be under someone else's authority, period. It's just going to happen. If there is no one above you, really the protection of God, you're like kind of hovering away from the protection and the blessing of God. And the blessing is not, let's just oppress you and get you to do things you don't want to do, but rather he wants you to thrive and grow and prosper. And how does he do it? He does it by saying, there are structures that I put in motion. Things grow when you follow these structures. And so how does this work? When we submit to one another. And it doesn't just say, just submit to one another and run amok. It's like, if that would happen, it would remind me of the times when my kids invite their friends to play in the backyard, and there's little supervision. It's just like anything can happen, right? And you know it. Maybe you remember sometimes that mom and dad would leave the house, and you were just so excited. And phone calls would happen, knocking at doors, and hey, free for all, right? And like the Lord of the Flies kind of situation, and like the small version of it, right? And then chaos happens. Well, This is not it. It just doesn't say, just submit to one another, just go with the flow. That's not what it's saying. It has a context. It has a bedding. And it says here, how? Out of reverence, the attitude, out of reverence to who? To the king. Replace Christ with king. Out of reverence to the king. What does this king do for you? How does this king act? What kind of king is this? Is this just a king? So if I were to obey and follow someone else's directions, traffic directions, my professor's directions, my parents' directions, my leader's direction, my spouse's direction, the question is, am I doing it because I'm being forced? Because I have to? Or because there is a motivation in my heart that, yes, I am obeying you, but I'm obeying you because I see Christ at work in this decision that I am about to make. How does the walk with Jesus begin? Let me reverse. Let me go even back. How does the ministry of Jesus begin? It begins with 30 years in obscurity. We know very little about Jesus, unless you're the Discovery Channel and they know way more than they should. And they come up with, here's the next thing that you didn't know, but it's there, right? But what we know about Jesus, the little we know about Jesus, is that the Bible says that he grew up to learn obedience, which is crazy. It just blows my mind. Every time I read it, it just blows my mind that the God of heaven would learn something new. Like, doesn't he know everything? Well, he didn't know obedience because it was the first time he ever had to obey anyone. So the question was for us children is, so at what point, kids, this is for the kids, children, who is still living in their parents' household because you're a child, you're not married, that their parents know about, single, available, little? Yeah, can you raise your hand, kids? Thank you. So for you, at what point, according to the Bible, should we obey our parents? When they're perfect? When they have it all right? When everything is fair? Can you imagine being the mom of Jesus? Like you have a perfect child at home. And not because they claim to be perfect, but because they're actually perfect. And then, because he's actually perfect, and then he's just learning to obey an imperfect person. What an unfair situation, don't you think? It's like, I think that if Jesus was, like, if I was in Jesus' feet, in Jesus' place, I would be like, Mom, you're holding me back. Like, I knew better before I met you, and now you're like asking me to. But Jesus learned obedience through an imperfect person. Isn't that crazy? And for so many of us, this doesn't happen with adults, kids. It only happens with you. We supersede if I will be obedient if you are perfect. Isn't that interesting? How is it that Jesus learned to obey imperfect people? And he submitted himself to them. And the amazing thing about Jesus' ministry, how does Jesus' ministry start? It could have begun with, hey guys, come over here. I'm about to do a huge miracle, pizza for all. Right? And boom, it just happens, right? Okay, bring all the sick people. My first event of ministry. Let's heal all the town. A massive, like a nuclear healing bomb, like good stuff. Let's start with a revival. Let's start with something majestic. Let me just descend from the heavens. And you see me coming down the clouds, right? Instead of that, how does he begin his ministry? With an attitude of humility. He chooses the path of humility. Did Jesus need to be baptized? That's the first thing that he does. Absolutely not. The ritual of baptism was so that you would be purified and be able to walk in the temple. It was a ritual that people were already doing. It was just done in a different context. And yet Jesus walks in the waters, and when he approaches John the Baptist, he's like, Jesus, you're out of your mind. Like, why are you asking me this? You are perfect. You're holy. I know who you are. And in that exchange, there is this double availability to the Father. Jesus is doing what the Father asked him to do without questioning him. He's not like, God, are you sure John and I used to hang out when we were kids? And you know John, he's kind of weird. He's kind of off. He's got his weird way of fashion, diet, seriously, all of those carbs every day. Who knows what he's doing all on his own in the wilderness? Do I really have to? And the Father, I bet he just had to say to Jesus once, go and be baptized in the wilderness. And Jesus didn't say, well, what's going to be the temperature for the day? Is the water going to be warm or cool? Or is the water clean, sanitized because I'm holy? If you actually go to Israel and you go to the river where Jesus was baptized, I think you would rather go to the Ohio River and be baptized there. It's just that dirty. But Jesus would say, absolutely, Father, no questions asked. I will do it. This is the way of Jesus, everyone. We've known it from the beginning. But there is something inside of us that says, but what if, what about? And we can go, what about for the rest of our life until we meet Jesus face to face and not be perfected to be like Jesus if we do. Are you with me? Or we can say, Jesus, your way, not my way. Your way, not my way. Now, what I am not saying here is, so let people oppress you and abuse you and do things that are just completely unfair to you. But what I am saying is this. As we learn to obey our human authorities, we're honoring God and we're giving a place and a space to understand the kindness of God and love people even in their imperfections. And so then we go, finally jumping to chapter 6, and this is what it says. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. I think that when we do parenting nowadays wrong, we teach them, my child is always right, and I will cope with what they say. So now there is this term that was kind of coined in maybe 2017 called the perennials. Have you heard about that? It's the parents of the millennials that are millennials. And so these are millennial parents who are having a different way of an approach to how do you parent. And I understand society has been changing in good ways. In good ways, in which way? Well, that probably there is not so much forcefulness and like use of physical punishment for parents to lead the child and to be more creative and more constructive in the way that they train their children. But the challenge now is that we seem to live in a full democracy in some homes where everyone has the same status and the same wisdom and the same direction. Here's the challenge when parents don't take on their leadership. Something I know about leadership. When there is a leadership vacuum, someone will try to fill it in. Have you seen that before? When there is a lack of clarity that I don't know where we're going, if someone just feels that because we need direction, sense of direction, someone will try to fill that in and try to step in for you if there is that lack of clarity, that lack of hump, I guess, or grit. If there is that lack, someone else will step in and do that. Now, when mom and dad don't agree on how they're going to lead the life of the child, who is going to step in to decide that? It's the child, right? I mean, if it was up to our children, some of our children would have ice cream for breakfast, dessert for lunch, and maybe, I don't know, pizza for dinner, and they would be totally happy. But if we're good parents, we teach them that green is good, right? It's okay. You're going to be all right. That sometimes we're not going to follow your palette, that home is not a restaurant where you just get exactly what you want, but sometimes you need to get nutritious things, right? We begin to bring structure to our children. And so the point here is this: a child doesn't obey their children only when it's fair, but because we want to honor God in our relationship with our parents. And then Paul comes here to explain, if you want a good reason why you should follow your parents' direction, this is it. And he says, honor your father and mother. This is a quote, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on the earth. So how do we children have that good life? It's not when we get the things that we want, but when we get to have the heart of God at work in us. And so how do we do it? We honor our father and our mother. Now, how do we honor a mom and a dad? If you're a child, I would say this to you. Speak the best of them, children. Speak the best of them. Speak in a way that it speaks up about them. And even for us who are married and are adults, I think that we should learn that too. That just because mom and dad are broken, it doesn't give us any right to be talking negatively about them. If we need to forgive and speak up about some healing, talk with them, let's go ahead and do that. But I don't need to be bringing the negative in them and just shoving it on their face, but rather this is an opportunity to say, I will choose to speak the best of you. I will choose to represent you well. And then Paul moves on to speak now to the fathers. Now, which is interesting. It doesn't say parents, and I don't think that he's saying, well, women don't count, but I wonder what role we men take on doing these bad practices. I just wonder. I'm just saying. And it says here, to not to do something and to do something. Maybe it's because women are more in the perfection path than we men are. I don't know. So it says, do not exasperate your children. Do not exasperate your children. What does that mean, exasperate? It's to drive someone mad, right? Like nagging them. You know the button, and so you're going to push it because you get a reaction out of them. And you do it again, right? So let me ask you some questions. Ask us parents some questions and just answer to yourself if you ever do this. Do you ever lead with no structure in your home? There's no structure. Just go and do and figure it out. I know from personal experience, and we have gone through this 3 times, that a child thrives with structure. A child thrives when they know what is expected of them. I'm not saying to time up to, this is exactly what we're going to do, but just to give them some sense of, this is when you know that things are working well. This is when you know things are not going so well, and then we will need to talk. This is when you get a reward. This is when you get taking away a privilege at home. Does that make sense? And so do we lead with that sense of structure in our lives? Do you use sarcasm to communicate with your child? Parents, bad practice. A child doesn't know yet how to communicate. When you use sarcasm at home, you are creating someone that doesn't yet understand how to use sarcasm in a way that is going to build us up, because that's the next thing that Paul is going to talk about. Everything you do, you should do to build up. Sarcasm, it's like cutting, right? It's like cutting, that cutting comment. That, man, it sounds a lot of fun, but there's some truth in it. Like, I'm telling you this for a reason, right? And so we need to be very careful how we refrain ourselves from some of the things that we can do among other adults. Do you speak critically and without encouragement? Do you speak critically and without encouragement? They only hear the negative of how you could just get a little bit better. You did fine, but you could actually do this different, right? Or the opposite. Are they so perfect that they feel like they're superhuman? And they never hear from you a correction. They only hear the positive and that they're great and awesome, but they don't come to terms with their need of repentance, of forgiveness, of asking for help. Do you speak harshly to your child? What tone of voice do you use? Or do you compare your child with others? This was just so horrible for me. I was the golden kid at home. And I was an only child, and maybe there is some narcissism in me, I'm sure, but I hated when my uncle and aunt would compare me to their children and would be, I wish you were like Marco. I wish you would behave well. It didn't feel proud of myself. I feel like I didn't want my cousin to be spoken that way. And what happened in him was, and he confessed to me at some point, I hated you, even though we're so close, because they would compare me to you. Don't compare your child. Enjoy who they are. They thrive when you get to know them for who they are and you encourage them to be who God created them to be. Do you embarrass your child in public? I don't know why, but there is part of our flesh as parents that sometimes something, let's be honest, it kind of feels good to embarrass your child in public when it's completely wrong. Am I sinning here, for being honest? But there's this part of me that I could tend to, if I'm not careful, speak negatively by kind of feeling good myself at the expense of my child. Bad thing, bad practice. Please don't hear me that I do it, but I refrain myself from doing it because it's so easy to go in that direction. Do you talk down to your child? Or do you try always, this is one that is kind of challenging and kind of tricky. Do you always try to make life completely and utterly fair for your child? Like everything should be fair for each one of the child. If you get one cookie, you get one cookie, and you get one cookie. If you get $10, you get $10, you get $10. It's a good idea. The problem is this. That's not the way that life works. Sometimes we can be fair. Sometimes we can't. I remember one of the pastors, Steve Otel. I was single, and I remember driving in the car. He's driving his kids to school, and then we would go and do ministry, he and I. And one of their kids just snaps at him. He's like, Dad, this is just not fair. He turns around and he says, life is not fair. Get accustomed to it. Get over it. That's the way it is. And I was like, whoa, take a lesson. Like, that was a lesson. Because it's the truth. I want my children to have a fair life, but it's not going to happen. My job is not to give them a fair life, but to teach them to have the character when life is not fair. Don't you think? Because then the child will know how not to give up in the situation and realize, yeah, life is not perfect. Jesus will make things perfect. But one day it will happen, not today. And in the meantime, I can continue to grow and mature. This is one of the big struggles, I think, that especially with younger families. Do you overprotect your child from their mistakes, from their errors? Do you try to rescue them every time? If you begin this process of rescuing your child, you're not building them up. Eventually, they will get themselves in trouble when they're, and you will want to come back and rescue them now in college, now out of college, now when they can't find a job, now that they got a spouse that was not probably their spouse for them, and now that they have children and come and rescue them from being irresponsible with their children. And now that they have children and their children want to move in with you because they were pretty much not knowing how, your children, how to save their lives, how to make changes because you crippled them. And you didn't show them that there are consequences to their actions. Is this the way that we want to live with our children? Now, I'm not saying when they make a mistake, you just say, well, just go and figure it out. That's not the point. Because actually, this is what the Bible teaches us next. And it says this. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. So how do we do it? We reverse to say, let me teach you, let me show you by example how to walk in a way that honors God. And so here's an important question for us to ask today. Where are you spending most of the time with your child? Are you spending time to train them to be a great student, a great athlete, a great friend, a great citizen? But where does God fit into all of that? Are you training them to walk in the Lord? And so, as I was preparing for this sermon, I just realized this is a big chunk. It's like we're speaking too many things at once. And so I think that for today, I'm going to stop here. But here's the question for us, Christ Church. In our relationship with our kids, we can start a brand new generation of people who don't have to struggle with the things that we struggled. And just looking back at the years that my parents spent with me to build me up in the Lord, I can say the good things that you see in me, many they have to do with my parents. The other many, and I didn't speak last week, is the married life that I have. One thing that the married life does to you is it shows you how selfish you can be, and you didn't even know it. And now you get to share your selfishness with someone else, and that's awesome. Not really. Because they get to see the worst of you, and you can't hide it. And it brings you back to your knees and say, God, I want to lead like Jesus. I want to walk like Jesus. And so, as we're getting ready to have this baptism of Franco, I want to remind us that earlier in our walk with Jesus, at one point we said, Jesus, you lead my life. That means that you gave up the leadership of your life over to someone who knows better than you. To someone that is going to ask you to do things that probably they don't sound like at times that they make much sense or they're very much fair. Let me tell you something. Jesus didn't go to the cross because it was fair, but because it was good. It was the right thing to do. So let's make our walk with each other in that submission to one another about what is right and not about what is fair. And let's commit to walk in that way with Jesus.